Allow your mind to switch off. Just as your body needs adequate recovery, so too with your mind and your brain. Your brain needs downtime, and I feel that all too often now it is starved of that precious space where it can recover, it can process, and it can come back fresh. So now I want to help you. I want this video to be practical and useful as possible. And what I've done is created 7 different strategies that if you apply all of them, I guarantee your ability to switch off will improve. Even if you start by experimenting with some of them, I think you'll be in a better position. But before I introduce you to these 7 steps or 7 strategies, I want us to begin by changing the language with which we use to describe this switching off piece. Switching off, I've never really liked it as a term. It's a bit passive, isn't it? As if the solution is just to stop all cognitive activity, to stop doing anything, to become idle. And it really isn't. Switching off is really more about creating an active relationship with your attention, isn't it? It's about mastering your attention. Just as your ability to focus and create profound depths of focus is a skill, on the flip side, so is your ability to create downtime, to allow your mind to wander. So, tip number 1, decide on your deadline for work. Now, I understand you might be thinking, well, Phil, my deadline changes each day. I'm on shifts. I get it. What I'm getting at is the importance of having a pre-decided time, a line in the sand beyond which you stop working and you start to give your brain the space it needs to at least try to switch off. So on one day it might be 5 p.m, the next day it might be 9 p.m, the next day it might be 3 in the morning. But the important piece is to have a pre-decided time based on what's realistic for you today, tomorrow, and the next day. You see, because once you've engaged in that decision, you've already made it more likely that as that time approaches, you feel like, oh, I've got some stuff to do. I'm approaching a self-imposed deadline, and now what do I need to do so that I can switch off after this time? Simple step, but this is often overlooked. Every day now, you start the day already knowing the time in the evening or whatever it might be for you, beyond which you stop and you give your brain that space to start to shift state. That is my tip number 1, establish on an ongoing basis, if it needs to change each day, what is the deadline today beyond which you stop working? Tip number 2, to establish a closing down ritual. Now, what I'm getting at here is having a deadline is one thing. The second thing that's equally, if not more important, is to actually set up a transition from being on to being off, to being focused, to being active, to being busy, and then something that is not those things. If you were to be working in a traditional environment like many of my colleagues, it might involve closing down a laptop, leaving an office, leaving a building. For you, maybe it's the journey home. Maybe it's a simple trick such as when you get home, changing your clothes, putting on your slippers, right? It doesn't really matter what you choose, but I invite you now to think of some examples that could help you understand or help you create a trigger. We're really using kind of classic behavioral conditioning here for you to think, okay, well, if I have a particular warm drink, a cup of green tea, or if I put on these particularly comfortable slippers, or if I have a cognitive activity, for example, the merits of, before you properly finish, to plan your day ahead. For you to think about, okay, have I got everything in place so that tomorrow I'm on it? You could instead think about reflective pieces, reflecting on the day. Well, what's gone well today? What am I grateful for today? Again, something I've mentioned in other videos. It's having a routine that you stick with, that you then capitalize on. As if X equals Y. The more you practice this trigger, the more it gives you this permission, right? Knowing Your brain is starting to know that right after this activity is complete, then my evening or my free time or whatever you want to call it, whatever's most relevant to you, that's when that begins. Okay, so you've got the deadline, but now you're kind of managing your transition from work and doing an activity to its absence. So that is my tip number 2, my friend. Figure out what that could be for you. Tip number 3, and this I think is as important as anything else. After this transition of yours, stop using your phone. Now I realise this is a big topic and we can't go too far into it today just because we don't have time. But look, think about what we're going for here, which is your ability to switch off. If we change that and we reframe that to be to stop using your attention, you can see how your current relationship with your phone is probably severely inhibiting your ability to switch off. Because let's face it, let's use tip 1 and tip 2 as an example, like a kind of a story. Imagine if you're now better at setting a deadline. Right, today beyond 7 p.m, no more work. And even at 7:05, you end your transition, your new routine to give your brain permission and the message it needs to go, right, now it's time to switch off. Well, if at 7:10 you just get your phone out and you start looking at the news, you start checking in on WhatsApp, you email a few colleagues, etc., etc., you can see that your brain, as far as your brain is concerned, you are still as on as you have been for the rest of the day. You've just changed the activity that you're engaging with. So, look, I appreciate your phone may be your access point to getting in touch with friends and relatives and family and people that nourish you. Cool. But I just want you to kind of accept that for as long as you are on your phone, your brain doesn't have a chance of switching off. So let's just think of some practical tips. Could you, again, think of a time, a deadline beyond which you stop using your phone? Maybe for you, it needs to be an hour after you do the other kind of official close, right? Understanding that there might be different sort of relationships here with work and then your phone, but there needs to be some sort of cutoff. What about if you are enjoying some downtime? What's your relationship with your phone then? Imagine you're watching a movie. If you ever have time for this, I don't know, but at least imagine, are you someone that also has your mobile phone in your hand? Right? Multimedia, multitasking. The point I'm getting at here is, I feel that many of us have established, unwittingly and unconsciously, a relationship with our phone that ultimately ends in a state of continual partial attention, which means that you never properly really switch on, and consequently it's very hard to ever properly switch off. Is your phone, for example, next to your bed when you wake up in the morning? What impact might that be having, almost indirectly, in your attention mastery, your focus during the day, and then also your ability to switch off in the evening or at some other time? Is your phone still in your hand, or at least in your immediate environment, in the last hour before you go back to bed? Well, if it is, think of the consequences of that. How your brain is really unsure whether it should be on or off. I mean, again, like I say, I can't emphasize this point enough. If you want your brain a bit of space to at least try to switch off, you need to create the conditions where it's at least possible. An environment which is non-distracted, let alone an environment which is continually demanding your attention with notifications, alerts, other apps, an endless information stream. I've just mentioned notifications there as well. Do you have notifications on your phone? How many of them do you think you get a day? Do you tend to get notifications in the hour or 2 hours before you want to go back to bed? And if you do, what do you think might be happening to your attention there? Now, again, it's not my job to say turn all your notifications off, but it's something you could try. Obviously, there may be channels of digital communication or other forms of communication that you need to keep open for emergencies. I get it. What about all the other stuff? Right? Again, your attention I would say is not only your most valuable tool, you could argue it is the only real asset you have. How you use your attention. So my invitation here, my friend, is to try to reclaim that. Try to begin by examining your relationship with your mobile phone, your smart device, and then examining when's the first time you check it when you wake up each day? When's the last time you check it? How many times do you think you unlock it on an average day? Number one, are those behaviors you'd recommend to someone you loved, someone you were caring for? And if not, what are some changes you can now make? Could you turn some alerts or notifications off? Could you charge your phone out of the bedroom just to start to recreate these moments where your brain can start to shift state in the way that you know it needs?